gods of the land cursed Zola, and so she went to war against them. The night Zola's life changed forever, she was standing in the middle of the evil forest. It was the one place where all outcasts and those whom the gods had cursed were sent. They were sent to die in a way that would not affect the rest of the village. But Zola was too stubborn. She refused to die. Instead, she turned the forest into her home. And this night, the gods were about to put her resilience to the test all over again. She stood in the center of the forest, her eyes closed as she listened hard. Her supernatural hearing kicked in. She could hear the paws of her prey running about on the forest floors. It was a deer, and from the sound it was making, dinner was going to be plentiful. But then, her body tensed as she realized that she wasn't hearing only the sounds of the deer. She could hear footfalls as well, heavy and quick footfalls. They belonged to humans. She opened her eyes at once, her pinpoint pupils seeing perfectly in the dark. She was able to zoom through the trees, and in shock, she realized that dozens of men were running towards her. She could also hear the sounds of their machetes scraping against their sheaths. They were there to assassinate her. At once, Zola went into full attack mode, and she turned and ran in the opposite direction. Claws emerged from her fingertips, giving her a powerful grip. She then leapt off the ground and landed on the trunk of a tree, climbing up it hurriedly until she was at the top. She then leapt off that tree to another one, and another one. By then, her pursuers had noticed her. She heard the moment they fired arrows at her, and as they flew through the air towards her, she managed to dodge every one of them, leaping from one treetop to the other. She kept going on and on towards the edge of the forest. With a roar, she gave a final leap and landed in front of a small hut, overlooking a cliff that plunged into the ocean. At the sound of her ferocious roar, another woman jumped out of the hut armed with a dangerous-looking dagger and spear. Her name was Mbeki. Zola told her that some people were there for her, but she was too late. Her pursuers finally caught up with her, and they surrounded them at once, arrows aimed at them. Mbeki recognized the pursuers. They were members of the royal soldiers of the Vunara kingdom, and they had come to finish what the forest had failed to do: kill Zola. Zola was born to Sarah and Odiu, a poor hunter and his beautiful wife. Unlike the brave and powerful hunters in Vunara, Odiu only focused on hunting smaller animals because they were easier to catch, and he couldn't bear to risk his life hunting the more dangerous ones. He was a simple man, and as long as he had enough for himself and his wife, he was satisfied. But all that was about to change. Zola's birth was nothing but controversial. Shortly before she was conceived, Odiu went hunting as usual. Unlike other hunters who went into the forest to hunt, Odiu preferred the much easier bushes. That fateful day, he was checking out his traps when he froze, one leg in the air. He had almost stepped into a snake's nest. It was a big snake, and it was as green as the bushes all around it, which made it easy for the snake to hide until it was too late. At once, Odiu staggered backwards, and he fell over as he tried to get away from the snake. He almost couldn't believe his luck. The same risk he was avoiding had come for him in the bushes. At once, he turned and began to run for his life. But he immediately tripped over a tree stump, his face striking dirt. The snake crawled towards him at top speed, and just as he tried to get up, the reptile's mouth opened wide. The fangs were bared, and with an evil hiss, it sank its fangs into Odiu's ankle. With a scream of pain, Odiu leapt to his feet and resumed running, as fast as his legs could carry him. The snake continued chasing him until he managed to get out of the bushes, running on the sandy ground. But still, he didn't stop. He kept running until he got home. By then, his ankle was swollen up, and when he stopped before his hut, his legs collapsed underneath him and he passed out. Thankfully, Sarah was home when this happened, and she was alerted by the sound of his body hitting the ground. She immediately took him inside and then ran to the medicine doctor's hut, pleading for him to save her husband's life. The medicine doctor began his work at once, extracting the snake's venom and making sure that the wound didn't get infected. He then told Sarah that Odiu would be bedridden for a while until he fully recovered from the snakebite. This was bad news. They were poor and relied heavily on the animals that Odu hunted. How was she going to survive with him being bedridden? She realized that it was up to her to keep things running until her husband was back on his feet. The only option that was available to her was hunting, although she knew nothing about it. She only hoped that her husband's traps would have caught a good animal. That way, they would be able to survive until he got better. So, that fateful morning, she went into the bush, hoping to get some game. However, just as with Odu, things didn't go as planned at all. While she was there, she was suddenly attacked by a leopard. It was monstrous and angry as it charged at her. She turned at once and ran for her life, deep into the bush. But not once did she try to kill it because it was taboo to hunt or kill a leopard. 10 moons ago, the chief priest had deemed it sacrilegious and said that any who dared such an act would be cursed by the gods. So all hunters avoided them like the plague. So Sarah ran with all her might in her bid to escape the angry leopard. She forgot all about the traps and focused on getting out of danger. It just wasn't worth the risk. Hunting had almost claimed Odu's life. She couldn't allow it to claim hers as well. Sarah didn't stop running, but the leopard didn't stop chasing her either. She soon found a fallen tree, she leapt over it, and then hid behind it. Her heart was beating heavily in her chest as she tried to stay quiet. The leopard arrived, snarling and angry as it looked around, searching for her. Then, after a while, it ran back into the bushes. Sarah let out a deep sigh of gratitude. She had managed to escape the wild animal. She then turned to leave when she froze at once. Right behind her, there was a carcass on the ground. It was just there. The head was gone and part of the flesh was also gone. Sarah knew what it was at once. It was what was left of the leopard's food. As she stared at it, she realized that she was staring at an opportunity. Since she couldn't get to her husband's trap, she decided to take it. She did this and managed to return home. Despite the carcass not being complete, there was enough to last them for a few weeks. While Odu recovered, they fed on the animal. Her husband was so impressed with her for bringing home an animal that it was bigger than anything he had ever caught. And while they ate it over the next few days, they got intimate multiple times. Sarah didn't think much of it until she got pregnant and eventually gave birth to Zola. Her baby was born with faint spotted marks along her spine, and her pupils were tiny and piercing. And even as a baby, she had sharp fingernails. Sarah realized that what she had found that day wasn't the leopard's meal. It was another leopard, one that had probably been killed by another hunter who left it. It also explained why the leopard had been angrily chasing her. She had committed a taboo by eating it. She and her husband, the elders of Unara, knew at once that Zola was cursed, but they first of all tried to see if the curse would fade with time. But Chief Bulu, the king's second in command, was adamant. He didn't want the curse to spread. Still, the king was merciful. He hoped that as Zola grew older, the curse would fade. They had already sent a hunter into exile in the past for killing a leopard. He didn't want to do that again, least of all to a child and her mother. So Zola remained in Vunara, but she wasn't getting any better. As a matter of fact, her differences were showing more clearly. Odu and Sarah tried to hide it, but they failed woefully. Everyone could see that Zola was not like other children. As a little girl, her eyes caught light the way animals did. She saw clearly in the dark and could move softly, sneaking up on anyone she wanted. Her fingernails grew sharper, and with time, she began to develop claws as well. But they remained hidden and only emerged when she was agitated or felt like she was in danger. She climbed trees easily, and when she ran, no one could catch her. Her hearing was powerful. She could hear rats in the walls, rabbits in the bushes, and birds in the trees. She could even hear snakes when they crawled across the ground. Whenever she went into the bush, it was impossible for her not to return with prey. She had two good friends while growing up, Tafari and Kofi. Kofi was the son of a hunter, while Tafari's father was a soldier in the king's army. When they played, they knew of Zola's differences and how powerful she was, but they didn't mind. Instead, they played with her, and when they went hunting, they always caught the best animals among their peers. But none of this was enough to protect her from what was to come. It was clear as day that she was cursed and the leopard spirit lived in her. She had to go. Sarah pled her case before the king. She swore that she didn't kill the leopard but found it that way. She hoped this would grant her leniency. The king assured her that she wasn't going to be punished for the leopard's death because they already knew who killed it and the culprit had already been sent into the evil forest. But in Zola's case, they didn't know how bad things could get or if she could be a threat to other villagers. Also, Chief Baloo was insisting that Zola must be exiled into the evil forest. That was the only way to protect Vunara. He was more concerned about the fate of the kingdom than one possessed little girl. When Sarah and Odiu saw that they couldn't stop it, they opted to go with their daughter, but the king stopped them. He couldn't afford to lose an entire family to the forest. So, that fateful day, royal soldiers escorted the little girl to the forest. Tafari and Kofi watched in tears as their friend was led away. The soldiers took her as far as they could dare and left her there. Zola survived on her own for the first few weeks, able to escape attempts by the wild animals that tried to feed on her. She, on the other hand, fed on the fruits of the forests and drank the water from the lake. For a long time, she walked all over the forest with nothing but the creatures of the wild to keep her company. Thanks to her superior hearing, she could hear animals from miles away, no matter how quiet they were. She could even hear their heart beating in their chest as they crept up on her. This way, she was able to stay ahead of them constantly. But soon, she found Becky, who turned out to be the hunter that the king had previously exiled into the forest. Her crime was actually killing a leopard. Becky confessed to her that she indeed committed the atrocious act and deserved her punishment, but others also deserved to be in the forest with her, because she had been set up, and she was going to make sure that everyone paid for what happened to her. When Becky heard of Zola's story, she was moved. Hearing that she was possessed by the leopard spirit only served to soften her heart. She decided to take Zola in and teach her how to survive in the forest. She saw it as a way to pay for her sins against the leopards she had killed in the past. But Becky didn't just help her survive in the wild. She also trained her, helping her to master her powers and embrace her differences. She pushed Zola to the limits, forcing her to run faster and faster each night so she could move swiftly without any light. She learned how to climb trees, with nothing but her claws that now emerged from her fingers at will. She became one with the forest and learned how the animals communicated with each other. She was a creature of the night and day, formidable no matter the time. But then, Becky was never satisfied. She told Zola that soon, people would notice that they were still alive and would come for them. So, they had been expecting. One day, Zola was swimming in the lake when she heard screams up ahead. She swam like a fish towards the sound. And to her horror, she saw that a boy had fallen into the water and a crocodile was dragging him away. The moment she got there, she used her fist to punch the crocodile in its mouth, forcing it to release the boy at once. This angered the animal greatly, and it turned on her. By then, the boy was weak and he began to sink. Zola tried to get to him, but the crocodile grabbed her by the arm and tried to drag her away. But she used her claws to poke the eye. It screamed in pain, rolling in the river as its teeth tightened around her arm. She then wrapped her legs around it, using all 5 claws of her free hand to grab the animal. Her sharp claws tore through the tough crocodile skin, causing it to bleed. Then, in pain, it finally released her, swimming away as fast as it could. Still underwater, Zola heard more screams from the boy's parents. She looked around and saw that the boy was still sinking. She swam towards him and grabbed him by his hand. Then, with immense strength, pulled him to the surface. He was unconscious, but when she beat his chest 3 times, he came awake at once, coughing up water. She turned him to his side so that all the water he had swallowed would be dispelled. The boy was finally safe. His parents thanked her profusely. She asked them who they were and why they were in the evil forest. They told her that they were merchants on the way to Vunara, and they needed to see the chief priest for an urgent matter. For the first time since she left her kingdom, this was the first time someone was mentioning the name, and it was a powerful moment for her. They went on to tell her that this was their first time going there and they had gotten lost. Hay thought they could take a shortcut and ended up in the evil forest. Zola knew that as long as they were in the forest, they were not safe. She decided to be their personal escort. She promised them that she would not leave their side until they left the forest. And so, she walked with them, protecting them from the wild animals of the forest. She helped them to fight off a lion and later on, a snake. By the time they got to the edge of the forest, Zola wished them a safe journey and bade them farewell. For a long time, she remained on the edge of the forest watching them walk into Vunara. It reminded her of Sarah and Odiu, her own parents, whom she had not seen again since she was exiled. She wondered what they would be doing and if they knew that she was still alive. She then returned to the hut on the edge of the cliff to tell Mbeki all about the beautiful merchant family that she had met at the river. Mbeki wasn't happy about this. She didn't trust the fact that a family had wandered into the evil forest on their way to Vunara. It just didn't make sense to her. Mbeki would have preferred it if Zola had minded her own business and pretended not to see them. Now they knew where they were, and it could only mean more trouble for them in the future. Zola was sure that Mbeki was only overreacting. She didn't think any parent would purposely put the life of their child at risk just for some conspiracy. She knew that she had made the right choice, saving their life, and she chose not to regret it. But then Mbeki was right. Zola had no idea how much her righteous act had sabotaged their safety. Barely a week after, Zola was out in search of pawpaws. She knew the perfect spot where the best flavors of pawpaw grew, and she was going to get them. If she got enough, she and Mbeki would have plenty for a few days. As dusk slowly fell on the forest, she continued her trip, hoping to get it and get back before morning. She made it to the pawpaw trees and plucked enough. However, as she was returning to the hut, she sensed a presence in the woods, watching her from the darkness. She slowed to a stop, her ears listening hard. She then lowered the bag of pawpaw to the ground. She could sense the danger, but she couldn't pinpoint it. Was it a person? Was it an animal? She had no idea. All she knew was that she was being watched. She tried to listen for footsteps, but it was deathly silence. She couldn't even hear a heartbeat. It was as if whatever was stalking her had no heart. This was unlike anything she had ever encountered. She realized that she had to keep a cool head, so she didn't make a mistake. She needed to force whatever was watching her out of hiding. That was the only way she could figure out what exactly was going on. And so, leaving the pawpaw behind, Zola broke into a brisk run. Almost immediately, she heard a growl behind her. It sounded unlike any animal she had ever heard before. Then, she heard the heavy footfalls chasing her. They sounded human. She ran fast, zipping through the trees as she was chased. She then immediately climbed up a tree, leaping off a branch onto another tree. She then turned to see if her pursuer would follow. And sure enough, she watched in shock as a human being like her climbed up the tree, just as nimbly as she herself. He was moving just like her, almost as if he were also possessed by the leopard spirit. As he leapt off a branch after her, Zola leapt into the air, charging towards him. Then, folding herself like a ball, she slammed hard into him. They crashed into each other midair. The sound was like thunder across the quiet night around them. They fell to the ground, rolling once before they surged to their feet. Zola took a fighting stance at once. Like her, this was no ordinary human. He was masked, and he also had claws like hers. But unlike her, his eyes were glowing, and he looked really menacing. She wondered if he had been exiled as well, and why he was attacking her. Then, he launched himself at her once more. They fought long and hard. Zola had to use everything that Mbeki taught her, yet it felt like it wasn't enough. The man matched her strength and speed. He punched her so hard that she flew through the air and crashed into a tree, causing it to crack heavily. He then ran after her, lifted her into the air by the neck, about to squeeze. But Zola wrapped herself around him, squeezing herself out of his iron grip. She then wrenched his fingers from her neck and punched him backward, sending him tumbling face first into another tree. But Zola had an advantage he didn't have. She knew the forest like the back of her hand. So she stopped engaging in full-on attack, running and leaping off trees. She knew every branch and leaf, and with that, she tricked him into jumping off a tree, and while he was in the air, she slammed her body into his, sending him crashing against another tree. With her strength, she ripped a branch off the tree and smashed it against his head, hitting it over and over until he fell unconscious. Zola immediately tied him up and then carried him back to the hut where Mbeki was waiting for her. Mbeki knew at once that their secret had been out. Someone knew that they were alive. They decided to question the strange man who had come for them. First, though, they proceeded to take off his mask. As Zola pulled it off his face, she screamed in shock as she leapt away from him. His was a face she had never imagined she would see again. It was Kofi, her childhood friend, whose father was a hunter. She was confused. She had always known Kofi to be normal, even when they played together. But now he seemed totally different. He was just like her. And even worse, he didn't seem to recognize her. Mbeki woke him up, wanting to question him. But when he awoke, his eyes were flat and expressionless, and they stared at Zola without recognition. Zola was shaken. She didn't want to harm her friend. He didn't look like he was fine, and she wanted to help him. But Mbeki warned her that the friend she knew was no more. This was someone who had tried to take her life. While they argued, Kofi suddenly snapped his binds like they weren't there. He rolled once and lunged back to his feet, reaching for Mbeki's spear. But Mbeki was swift. She feinted out of the way and punched him hard, sending him staggering backward. But he was too strong. He punched her back, causing her to fly into the wall of the hut, cracking it heavily. Zola flew at him, her claws out as she punched him hard. Her fingers tightened around his neck, and as he tried to pull away, she ripped a talisman off his neck. He staggered backward, shaking his head as if he were dizzy. He tried to punch her again, but she dodged it easily, caught his hand, and twisted it. Another talisman that was on his wrist fell to the ground. She then punched him hard, sending him flying across the air and into the hut, sending the entire wall crashing down. As Kofi struggled to his feet, Zola's raised fists slowly lowered. The fire in his eyes was gone. They looked like Zola's pin pupils. He looked around, as if he were confused about where he was. Then, with a grunt, he turned and ran off into the forest. Zola wanted to chase him, but Mbeki was on the floor, wounded and bleeding, so she ran to help her out. Weakly, Mbeki told her that Kofi's arrival wasn't a coincidence. It had to do with the merchant family she had rescued. She assured Zola that more attempts would be made on their lives and that they had to be prepared for an attack. Zola assumed she would have to deal with another superpowered individual like Kofi, but she was wrong, because when the next wave of attacks came, they were by members of the royal soldiers. They had managed to track Zola down and chased her to the hut at the edge of the forest. Mbeki was yet to fully recover from her injuries, but she was strong enough to defend herself. After all, these soldiers were regular humans. Finding out that they were royal soldiers was upsetting to Zola. She realized that the king himself was the one who was trying so hard to kill them. But this didn't make sense. The king had tried his best to prevent her from being exiled to the forest. What changed? However, Zola couldn't bother herself answering that because she and Mbeki were surrounded by arrows pointed at them. But neither of them was scared. They instead launched the first attack. Zola lunged forward, catching the soldiers by surprise. As they fired the arrows, Zola dodged them easily, letting them fly past her. She then beat the soldiers all up. Mbeki, armed with her spear and knife, beat up what was left of them. By the time the fight was over, all the men were still alive, but each had at least one limb broken. Zola then questioned them. She wanted to know why the king had sent soldiers after them, even after sending Kofi already. After all, they had obeyed the law and remained in the evil forest. Why did he want them dead so much? The soldiers then confessed that the king had not sent them. They were there on the orders of Chief Bulu, the king's second-in-command, to eliminate them. This was easier to believe for her. Zola recalled how vocal Chief Bulu had been during her case and how he so badly wanted her exiled. He had wanted it so much more than the king himself. Upon further interrogation, Zola and Mbeki learned that the chief priest had given a decree that if Zola and Mbeki were not killed, terrible things would happen to the kingdom. And in that moment, it clicked. The chief priest and Chief Baloo were working together. Becky revealed to Zola that before her exile, she was not just a hunter. She hunted leopards specifically, but she didn't do it for herself. She did it for the chief priest. He had declared hunting leopards a taboo just so that he could have exclusive access to them. But then, she stopped working for him because it wasn't right. He was lying to the people, and she was ready to expose him. But things changed overnight. She was framed for the death of a leopard and sent into the evil forest to die. While she did kill leopards, the very leopard she was punished for did not die by her hands. And that leopard she was framed with turned out to be the very one that Sarah, Zola's mother, had stumbled on and taken home for her and her husband to eat. It all suddenly made sense. Chief Baloo was the mastermind. He was the one getting all the leopards while the chief priest was his patsy. This was the reason he could use the royal soldiers as he wished. He wanted both Becky and Zola gone because if they stayed, it would have been clear that there was no curse, and his plans would scatter. Everything was based on a lie. Becky and Zola realized one major thing. They could return home. And so, with the injured soldiers, they made their way back to the kingdom of Unara. They went straight to the palace. Chief Baloo heard of their arrival and tried to stop them. But Becky and Zola fought through the men until they got right to the king. There, they told him everything. Chief Baloo denied it vehemently, but to be sure, the king decided that they would search his compound. And to everyone's shock, they found leopard carcasses stored in Chief Baloo's house. There were so many of them. Seeing that his plan had been discovered, he confessed that he sold them at a great price to merchants from neighboring villages, because leopard skin was highly coveted. He knew that if the people of Unara found out, they would want to join in, so he told the chief priest to lie about the taboo so only he could hunt the leopards. The family that Zola saved had been on their way to buy from him as well, and they told him of the mysterious woman who rescued their son from the crocodile. He knew then Zola was still alive, and as far as she was living, she was still a threat to his scheme. So he sent his secret weapon after her, Kofi. He and the chief priest had tried to recreate what happened to Zola. They wanted more people possessed by the leopard spirits so they could be weaponized. They kidnapped children from the kingdom and ran dark rituals on them, hoping to make them like Zola, but they had always failed. Kofi was their first success, and even he failed when he went against Zola. He was controlled by the talisman that was worn on his neck and wrist. When he lost them during the fight, he was freed from their control. And now, Kofi came forward to confess about the atrocious rituals the chief priest had done on him, trying to turn him into Zola, and how much he suffered. When Chief Baloo was asked why he wanted soldiers and all that money, he confessed that he was trying to overthrow the king and take control of Unara. With soldiers like Kofi and money from the leopard sales, he would be able to do just that. The chief priest came forward to confess as well. It turns out that the leopard spirits didn't like the merchants because their carcasses were put to inhumane and horrific uses. Leopards who were sold were unable to transcend into the spirit realm because they were never properly returned to the earth. So, when Sarah and her husband ate the leopard, that dead leopard took hold of her baby and reincarnated in her body, using that as a means to end Chief Baloo's reign of terror, not just on Unara, but on the leopards as well, thereby squashing his diabolical plan for the kingdom. This revelation shook the entire village. The king couldn't believe that his second-in-command could do such horrific things, even condemning 2 people to death. Both the chief priest and Chief Baloo were exiled into the evil forest, sealing their fate with wild leopards. All the hunters who helped them hunt down the leopards were banished from the village, and their properties were shared among the victims, which included Zola, Becky, Kofi, and the other victims the chief priest had performed the ritual on. Both of them went on to join the royal soldiers. They were formidable in battle, winning a lot of wars. And as long as Zola was there, the battle was as good as over. And that was how the legend was born. Her name was Zola. Today the world knows the Black Panther as one of the greatest heroes ever created. A warrior blessed by a sacred animal spirit, granted the speed, the strength, the senses, and the instincts of a great cat. A protector who moves through the shadows like something not entirely human. whose power comes not from a machine or a distant star, but from the spirit of an animal woven into their very blood. The world calls it fiction, but long before that story was ever drawn on a page, Africa already knew the truth of it. The idea of a human being carrying the spirit of a great cat is older than any comic book. It lived in the oldest legends of the continent, tales of men and women who moved like leopards in the dark, who saw what others could not see, who heard the heartbeat of an enemy long before that enemy ever arrived. Warriors said to be chosen or cursed by the spirit of the most feared predator to ever walk African soil. Zola was one of those legends, a girl the world called cursed, exiled to die because the people were too afraid to understand what she truly was. She carried the spirit of the leopard in her blood, its claws, its eyes, its silence, its power, and instead of destroying her, that spirit made her into something the world had never seen. Not a monster, a protector, a woman who used the very power they feared to save the innocent, to expose the wicked, and to defend the kingdom that had cast her out. She wore no advanced suit. She came from no hidden technological kingdom. She had only a spotted mark along her spine, claws that emerged when the innocent needed defending, and the unbreakable will of a woman who refused to die when the whole world had decided she should. The Black Panther was never simply the invention of a comic book studio. The blueprint was drawn in the forests of ancient Africa, in the legends of those who carried the panther spirit long before anyone gave that power a name. Chosen ones, feared ones, the men and women whose blood ran with the strength of the great cat. Zola's story was almost lost to time, buried under the same fear that once tried to bury her alive. But some legends refused to stay in the dark. This was hers, and now you know where the legend of the panther truly began.